All right, welcome to the first episode of You've Probably Never Heard of Me, the podcast where we introduce you to underground artists, creators, and changemakers who are too good to be this unknown. I'm your host, Ryan Allen. I've been writing songs and playing in bands like Extra Arms, Thunderbirds Are Now, Big Life, etc., out of Detroit for over 25 years. And I've learned that some of the best people in the game are still waiting for the world to catch up. So consider this podcast your introduction. Today, I'm talking to Robby Miller, a producer, a mixer, and a mastering engineer based in Canada. He's worked with Ryan Roxie of Alice Cooper fame. He's worked with other artists like Mara, Lady Captain, and most recently, he produced and mixed and mastered my new EP. It's called "They're Coming for Us." You've probably never heard of him, but let's change that. So, thank you very much, Robby, for being here, for being my test subject. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited to also just catch up with you because it's been a hot minute since the EP release. So
For sure,
this
yeah.
is also really exciting.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me. Um, for people who are watching or listening, first thing they probably notice, you have a British accent, all right, but you live in Canada, so we have to start with, you. I really am curious about your sort of background of your story. Tell me about where you grew up and kind of how you ended up where you are now.
Yeah, well, as the saying goes, the worst part of being British is I have to put on the accent every single day. So
Right.
pretty used to it now. But I grew up in Bedford, in the UK, and which is fairly close to London, about an hour away from London.
Mhm.
Pretty cool place in terms of location. Um, and yeah, close to London, close to Cambridge, Oxford. Yeah, so it was never too far from some of the major places you might
So
want to visit.
culture was like around. You
It
weren't
was
like,
around. I
okay,
wasn't stuck
right,
completely out,
right,
in the sticks too much. It was
okay.
yeah, and yeah. So and honestly, that's where where I was established in terms of like we never really moved anywhere. It's always been Bedford.
Okay.
So that's where I was in all my bands. Where I did my first gig. And actually, weirdly enough, Bedford has some cool claims to fame. For those that are maybe familiar with 80s and 90s rock English rock and roll, you might remember a band called the Choir Boys,
Okay.
although they were the London Choir Boys in North
Yeah.
America, and they're from Bedford, and then recent new acts, a great indie pop singer called Tom Grennan,
Okay.
who you if you haven't caught him yet, he's just keeps blowing up more and more.
I've
He's
never heard of him. Maybe I should have him on the
maybe you should have him on the
podcast.
podcast.
I'll
Maybe
get
it
a
needs
hold
to
of his
happen. But
publicist.
he's from Bedford. So
Okay.
Bedford weirdly has, and there's tons more. It weirdly has this like connection to a lot of things. So, anyways, that's where I'm from.
Were you into
And
like Britpop and like the Oasis? Like I know you're a little bit younger than me, so that might have been a
right,
little bit before you were starting to get into music, but like did you connect with British music? Was it um
I
like
think
was there an
so.
artist or a scene or anything that you felt like drawn to as a young person?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would say like, growing up in England, America just always seemed cooler because I don't know, most of the TV shows and cartoons and movies we watch were all American stuff, really. So,
Sure.
I think,
Cowboys.
yeah, maybe, but
Fast cars. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. But I think growing up, really, one of the first bands I was always just like, oh my gosh, um, like these guys are really cool. Was a band, The Offspring.
Okay.
They were like my sort of first heroes. I
Pretty
didn't
fly.
really, yeah, that stuff. I didn't really get into the Britpop stuff actually until a lot later.
Okay.
I just always used to think it was kind of, actually, if I'm being honest, Ryan, I always kind of thought it was boring. But maybe it's because
Well,
it
I
was
mean,
like so much in the charts, and maybe it was just
it
I
was
associate it.
popular music, right?
Yeah,
Like,
right.
and
Yeah,
when even for like me growing up, you had like bands who were mainstream, right? And maybe upon like reflection were better than you gave them credit for at the time because it seemed like your parents' music or grandpa
yes,
music or whatever. And so
exactly.
if you're at the the supermarket or something and you're hearing "Don't Look Back in Anger" every time, it doesn't sound revolutionary to you
Yeah.
in maybe the same way it did 5 to 10 years prior. You know what I mean? So
Yes.
like at that point, like given how old are you? Are you
I'm
like
turning 37 this year, so
okay, so like, if whatever definitely maybe came out in 1994, by
mm,
2004, when you're maybe a little bit older and you're like starting to pay attention to music and getting into the bands like the Offspring or
yeah,
something like that, it doesn't sound as like adventurous or like exciting to you because it's
exactly.
just normal part of the culture, grocery store music. You know what I mean?
Yes. But in the last 10 years, I've done my Britpop phase, I feel like now. And like, when I often go back and watch some of those Oasis videos of them playing at Nebworth or,
Hmm.
Wembley Arena, Wembley Stadium. And you're just like, oh my gosh, just like the ultimate rock and roll band.
And just like culturally
Ah,
impactful in a way that
yeah,
like very few artists can be, right?
yeah.
But I would say that we have heard of Blur, we have heard of Oasis. So let's move off
True.
of that.
Okay, yes,
Tell
let's move
tell
on.
me, so you grew up in Bedford,
Yeah,
you started playing music in Bedford.
yeah.
Um, I'm curious how you ended up in Canada. You're in
I
Quebec,
ask
right?
myself that every single day. Me and my wife often like have our morning breakfast. Like, how did we end up here?
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. Well, look. Basically, I'll see if I can summarize it for you. I went and did in like 2011 sort of time after I played in quite a few bands and sort of was ready to explore the world. By then I guess I would have been like 22, 23.
Hmm.
um yeah, I was just like, I want to go and travel a little bit, so I went to the States and in California and did a couple of summer camps and did a lot of music out there, as um, and met other people that were also doing their gap years, or however you might want to think about it, were traveling.
Right.
um, and that's actually, weirdly enough, through all of that circumstances, where I met my wife.
Okay.
And we ended up moving to the UK, and she also moved to the UK. Or I moved back to the UK, I should say, back to good old Bedford. And then we wanted to keep exploring and keep traveling. So actually, we ended up moving to New Hampshire, of all
Okay.
places.
Okay.
And I lived in New Hampshire, live free or die, for 2 years.
All right.
And then we were like, you know what? I think we're ready to move on a little bit. And so, we were just thinking like, hey, do we move back to England again, or should we keep this adventure going? My wife's also Canadian, so we moved to Ottawa because that seemed to work out for us, with some job employment wise. And then we ended up in the pandemic moving to Wakefield, Quebec,
Right.
and
Okay.
that's where I'm at now. So obviously I've condensed that into about 2 minutes, but that's
Yeah.
like
I was
14 years worth of traveling.
Well, I mean, you could pick worse places. So, I mean, growing up here in Detroit, Canada and Windsor, it's right over
Right,
the bridge. So,
right, right, right.
my like proximity and exposure to Canadian culture and music has like always been sort of like sewn into my like life experience. I mean, when I was a young person, I would go to Windsor. There was like so you have to be 21 to drink in the US, as
Right.
most people who would be watching this will know, but in Canada, you can start drinking in bars at 19. So
That's right.
we would go over there and to Windsor, on a Friday or Saturday night, and there was a bar called The Loop, and they would play like indie rock music, like Belle and Sebastian, and some Canadian stuff too. And we would go and we dance and we get drunk, and so like I was going over there to do that. I was going over there to see shows, a lot. And a lot of the bands that I was getting into as a teenager, I got into because the alternative radio station in Detroit was actually based in Windsor. So they would have to, by law, play Canadian music. So
Yes.
you'd hear Foo Fighters and Pearl Jam, and then you'd hear like a Tragically Hip or a Sloan song.
Yeah.
And it would just sound like a natural, like, like uh, series of bands to follow each other to me.
Yeah.
But if you lived in Cleveland or
you wouldn't
you
hear that
or
stuff.
Chicago or something, you wouldn't get that exposure. So
Same with me, man.
anyway,
Like I'd never even heard, shamefully, but I'll be vulnerable. I'd never even heard of the Tragically Hip until I moved to Canada,
right. And
and
then
then
you
I
couldn't
just,
avoid them.
oh my gosh, just overwhelmed by like the national treasures that they
Yeah.
were or they are, and it's almost like Canada's Led Zeppelin, not in the genre sense, but like everyone's like get the lead out, or over here it's get the hip out, like
Yeah,
get the
absolutely.
hip on the stereo.
Really interesting band too. Like, super literate, very like patriotic in their Canadian like love for
Very
being
proud.
Canadian.
Yeah, yeah, definitely
Yeah,
like carried the torch and very proud of being Canadian rock. I always feel like when I listen to the Tragically Hip, they're like Canada's REM.
totally.
They
Yeah.
remind me of REM a lot.
I agree. I
And
agree.
I
There's
really
like
like it.
purpose to their music, there's
Yes.
poetry, but yeah, at the same time, like it's super accessible,
Yeah.
but then also they are sort of weird in their like arrangements and things kind of like are off kilter here and there.
Yeah.
I'm not like a huge fan, but I have great respect for them and you know, RIP Gord.
Yes, indeed.
Well, let's move on because I'm curious. So I read that uh, when you started playing music, you started playing with your dad.
That's
And
right.
I have my dad's a musician, so
Yep.
we have kind of something in common there. But you started playing with your dad's folk band as a teenager, and I'm curious, like, was that something you like wanted to do, or were you like, did you volunteer, or were you kind of like,
Yeah.
like almost like Rankin family style, like,
Yeah.
this is just what you do now? Like,
It
what
was
was that
that.
about?
It was the
Okay.
latter one. Yeah.
Okay, tell me
Basically,
about that.
yeah, what happened was no one in my family played instruments or music, by the way. And then my sister came home from school one day and said they're offering guitar lessons at school. And my dad had always, we had always been a music loving family. There's no doubt about that. Music on all the time, but no one played an instrument. And so my dad said, okay, well, I'll pay for your guitar lessons, but I want you to come home and teach me what you learned at your lessons so
Okay,
I can
this
do
is
it for
very
me.
interesting.
So
Hmm.
that's what happened. And then as a family we went and bought my sister a guitar, and then maybe 10 days later another guitar had appeared in the house,
Okay.
and then a couple of weeks later, then maybe there's a banjo in the house, and it just grew, and it just was like it just didn't stop, and we as a family became obsessed with learning musical instruments. And my dad, you know had always loves traditional Irish, Scottish folk music, the diddly diddly music, as they
Hmm.
used to call it.
Okay.
And and then it just sort of organically went from there. It ended up with my sister learning how to play traditional Irish banjo. My dad would play the bowron, and I didn't even want to play guitar. There was nothing. It just was there all of a sudden. So I just remember
Hmm.
picking it up, and I learned A, D, and E major chords, and then I could now play 300 Irish jigs and reels with that. And so all of a sudden we were playing music as a family.
Wow.
And then and it grew from there. Every Paddy's Day, every weekend, and I was going out, and this is when I was like 10 years old. I'd go out to these smoky pubs, because you could still smoke in pubs at the time. And we were all still very new to it. Like I said, none of us had gigged before, but I remember Dad handing me like a £10 note, and saying like, "There you go. That's like for playing music last night." Me going,
Hmm.
"What? Wait on a minute. I can get paid for doing this," and
Right.
that is just where it took off. So then I really, a few years later, as maybe I was getting into my early teens, I gotta say, traditional Irish and Scottish folk music, it wasn't as cool as
It wasn't
Black
the
Sabbath.
offspring.
Yeah, it wasn't Black Sabbath. It wasn't The Offspring. It wasn't Slipknot. It wasn't
Right.
Metallica. It wasn't all these
Right.
bands that I was like
Right.
watching on Kerrang
Right.
TV or stuff like that. So
Okay.
then, of course, I asked for a big pointy black BC
Hmm.
Rich guitar for Christmas,
Yep.
and then that was it. Game over. I was like full on rock and roll.
You
But
were
yeah,
West Borland all of a sudden.
exactly. But it definitely started with the folk stuff, and we did that for many years, and even into the rock and roll. When I was in my teenage punk bands, I was still out
Hmm.
playing Irish music every weekend with my
Yeah.
family, and of course, a little bit like the Britpop thing that we were talking about earlier. At the time, I sure enough, probably used to yawn my way through those gigs and
Right.
stuff. but now it's music that I love listening to and I love putting on around the house. So you end up coming back and having a
Hmm.
almost a bigger and deeper and nostalgic appreciation for
Yeah.
that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, as you age, if you're a curious person, especially, you just continue to expand, your palette. And I think it's super interesting. Like, there's a lot there, to unpack it in terms of just like the fact that you actually taught your parent something, right?
Yeah,
Which, um, my experience was the opposite. My dad played guitar, ever since he was a teenager.
so it was
Eventually, when I
always
was
happening.
born, yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, it was like guitars were, part of my very earliest memories, and when I became, interested in learning it on my own, probably like 10, 11, 12 years old, I was like the 11-year-old kid, like, Dad, hey, like, can you show me some chords, and he was more than happy to do it. I mean, that was like I think our relationship really like started to blossom at that point. But
and do you feel like your dad did a really good job of not like pressuring you to do that?
I do, yeah. I
Yeah,
would
that's
say,
awesome.
that's something I come back to a lot is the fact that like it was an option, but not
Hmm.
a forced situation. Like I was the one who vocalized, like I want to
Yeah,
take guitar lessons. But I also, this was like 1991, 1992 when like Nevermind had just come out and Nirvana was everywhere and it was, very visceral and yet at the same time felt like, I think I could do what they're like, I could do that
yeah,
maybe, like it was the Ramones thing, right? Like a lot of people say when like they first heard the Ramones, who were probably 10, 15 years older than I am, they
yeah,
immediately wanted to start a band because it felt like something they could do. It wasn't Yes or King Crimson
yeah.
or Christopher Cross or this like or um Steely Dan or something that was like
And it
super
looked cool.
complicated, or
It
even Led
looked cool,
Zeppelin,
you know?
you
Yeah,
know,
exactly. Yeah.
which is super complicated to like a 12-year-old, right? Unless you're like a virtuoso. But
Hmm.
what I was curious about is, and this kind of parlays maybe into the next question I have for you too a little bit, but do you feel like learning sort of more traditional folk-based, acoustic-based music, do you feel like starting at that point gave you any kind of edge or like ability to kind of like, as you progressed as a musician, like that foundation, did that help you when it came to like getting better at your instrument or understanding how music and song composition and even production potentially is like kind of like put together, arrangements, like all these things? Do you feel like starting with folk, starting in the way that you started, impacted your trajectory in any way?
100% it did. Yeah, because some of those Irish jigs and reels, man, those chord changes are fast.
Hmm.
They're super fast, and the rhythms can be really complex. I
Right.
was
Yeah.
doing,
Hmm.
that's kind of strumming.
Like
I didn't even,
wrist, kind of like tight, like action
yeah,
wrist. Yeah.
and I didn't even know that that's how you. I didn't even really understand. No one really necessarily showed me that. It just ended up, me watching other people in our little network of a family band here, and I sort of picked it up on my own. So I didn't know what a 16th note was or what an eighth note was. I just knew that the rhythm I was playing was correct. And I just
Hmm.
knew that the next chord change from an A was going to be to the D, and then it was going to
Right.
be back to A and then to E. I didn't have a chord chart in front of me. It was just stuff that I just sort of ended up soaking up, and it became instinctive
Hmm.
and like, so I definitely have so much thanks to learning music that way, because when you go and watch, if you've ever been lucky enough to go to a really good Irish session, you know um you watch you watch those musicians, and it's all telepathic almost.
Hmm.
They almost all know when to change to the well, they do know when to change to the next tune,
Sure.
and then they know when to make bits louder, and they know who's gonna start the next tune off. Everyone backs off, and then everyone jumps back in, and no one said a word. No one's even really mentioned what
Well, it's
the
like
next tune
jazz
is.
kind of, right? Like the
Yeah,
same kind of like,
exactly.
like you said, telepathic, like wordless, more of a
Yeah.
like, body language and vibe, for lack of a better word, kind of like those are the things that like guide you versus like, okay, the song is verse, chorus, verse, bridge, you know,
Yeah,
pre-chorus, what, like the traditional like rock construction
exactly.
isn't necessarily applied when it comes to, music that is kind of like bluegrass is another good example of
Yeah.
that,
Yeah, it's
where it's
very,
like
very
music
similar.
that's
Yeah.
created in this like communal way, you know,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
that, kind of differentiates to some degree from like the traditional like pop rock, like song structure, Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
so you've played in bands, you've toured, you've played a million gigs. This is fast forwarding a little bit, but
Hmm.
your current kind of like, identity is as a producer, a
Yeah.
mixer, mastering records. How did you kind of go from like playing in bands, doing, the touring to sort of saying like, I think maybe my place is not on stage and it's more, I don't want to call it like a behind the scenes role because it's
No, but
super
yeah,
important to the entire process,
yeah,
but it is behind the
it
scenes,
is.
right? Like
Yeah.
you're taking yourself out of that spotlight and putting yourself into a different situation. So how did you go from, you know, the gig life to
Yeah.
I'm going to help other people kind of realize their dreams, I guess, for lack of a better word, when it comes to kind of
Yeah.
bringing that, recordings and things like that to life.
Well, I think really I've always had an interest in production and making demo songs. I was thinking about this the other day. You must have done the same thing. You know, when you're in your first teenage punk band or whatever, and you make a demo. Like we used to actually like sell that demo.
Oh yeah,
Like a demo,
put it on
like
a
was a
CDR or cassette. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It wasn't ever like what might come from a song. It was just like, oh yeah,
Mhm.
we made a demo CD. Like that's what we're selling. I just thought that was cool, and that
Oh,
doesn't really
absolutely. Yeah,
happen
I did
anymore.
all that.
Um, but yeah, so coming from that sort of making demos and not really even knowing what an EQ is and just like balancing faders and be like,
Hmm.
oh, it sounds good to me. All right, like well, let's go with that. Um,
Everything's redlined, and you don't know
Everything's
what distortion
redlined.
is.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
exactly.
Yeah,
um, and then yeah, so I think I've always had a bit of an interest in it, but you know, to be super honest, it was the pandemic for sure that
sure.
changed
Okay.
things, everything for me. And um, 2020 hit. I had just finished, or I just sort of come off the back of a tour with Ryan Roxie, who was doing a lot of playing on his solo stuff when he's not playing for Alice Cooper. So, we'd done a couple of US tours and we did some stuff in Europe and the UK. And, you know, I was really enjoying that rhythm and I was really enjoying of being someone's guitarist and sort of
Hmm.
playing it and playing cool gigs as well,
Yeah.
And then 2020 hit, and as we all know what happened from there, we were all around for that. So what I wasn't prepared to do is and wait for gigging and touring to open up again because something just told me it was going to be a while. And I had a lot of friends that were like, yeah, I think we'll just, as soon as it gets, as soon as we can, we'll get going again and we'll just wait around until it does. And I was like, I'm not
Yeah.
quite willing to do that. So
Well, it
I
seemed very unclear at the time, like what we as like a collective, like
yeah,
global society were really gonna do.
yeah,
Like I feel like there, at least in the US, there was a lot of pushback around masking and
yes,
eventually getting vaccinated, and it became this like political issue, but
mm,
it really was one of these like very few moments in time where like if we all do this thing, this thing that we don't want to be happening could be over. But
right.
easier said than done, right?
Very, yeah,
And
exactly.
and there were different levels of that. But you know, I'm curious, like you was the touring with Ryan. I'm curious how you got hooked up with him. So
Hmm.
maybe, parking lot that for a second, but was that your main source of income at the time? So when that ended, was it like, oh shit, like that's gone away, and so I need to like figure out like immediately how to, continue to make money during, like what was that like from
I
a
definitely
financial
wasn't.
perspective?
Yeah, I definitely financially wasn't relying on the touring, as
Okay.
you can imagine. that wasn't, always the most reliable thing in the world.
Okay.
Trying to tour and do shows, but um, I do a lot of guitar teaching, and so that certainly dried up. And but I was, but to your point, I was also doing solo gigs and cover gigs, and playing in
Okay.
bars,
So
and
you
that
were
was
spreading out
yeah,
your
100%,
like
yeah,
options, it sounds
yeah.
like, but was it mostly music related? Where you weren't like
It was
working
all
like a
music.
desk job or
No,
something
it's
also or
it
whatever?
was
Okay.
all music related.
Okay.
Um, and so yeah, so the obviously gigs dried up completely, and I was like, I just really struggle sitting around waiting for anything. So I was thinking, well, I've always liked production, like, and I'd had me and my buddy Matt had made my first EP, and had really gone down the rabbit hole of how we do that on our own and whatnot. He's a great producer,
Hmm.
and so yeah, it was just one of those things. Where I was like, I think I might want to actually not start back gigging again when it all does reopen. I just sort of had this feeling like I'm not sure that's right for me anymore,
Hmm.
which was really difficult, and I had to go through a bit of a grieving period with it, and
Yeah.
because my identity, as you pointed out, it really was every weekend, 3 4 times a week, I was doing some kind of gig or I was playing some kind of
Sure.
place. To go from all of that to nothing is, and then for it to like, yeah, like, okay, well, what's my identity now? Like, what's my purpose in music? Definitely had to go through a bit of sort of grieving for that, and
Well, yeah,
understanding.
anybody in live production, live entertainment,
Yeah,
events, you know, all everyone had to stop. Like the
yeah,
guitar player in Extra Arms, my band at the time, um, he did live production, and
okay,
that
yeah,
completely it ground to a halt, and it was a emotionally challenging time for him, for sure. Like going from like doing like lights and pyro at like professional sporting events to like or like an auto show or whatever to being nothing, and so
yeah,
I can't I had a desk job at the time.
hmm,
Things slowed down, but like I mean it was certainly difficult to just especially like so the pandemic was probably what that was 2020, so I was 40 at the time. And like you're making this transition into your 40s and you're like I'm still young, but like I know I'm getting older now, and this now I'm in my 40s, and for me it was like my time to like capitalize, I felt like was like the window had closed, where all of a
yeah,
sudden it's like, oh man, like I don't know how long this is going to go on for. Like,
yeah.
am I going to lose the last bit of like of my cool years to this thing, which is such a weird like
But yeah, we
headspace to
we
be
all
in.
had
But
those interesting thoughts and like trying to predict the future, but not being able to. And oh, this will be the year everything opens up again,
mhm,
and then it doesn't.
right, and then
So
another wave comes along, and all of
another
a sudden
wave
you're
came
back. Yeah,
along. Yeah. So for
yeah.
me, it
Well,
was a case of just being like, okay, I don't think I want to wait around for this. I think I want to start mixing people's music. I think I want to start producing people's music. And then when I started it and I just started doing it for friends,
mhm,
I just loved it. And I was like, this is, wait, you're telling me I get to creatively work on someone's song and then I get to give it back to them and it's now their responsibility to go and promote it and do everything
right.
with it. And I get to do something else now?
Hmm.
That sounds amazing. So I
Yeah.
was like,
Okay.
I was fully into it and I still am, I still love that whole process. So that's really what did it. And then, 7 years later, I've, just always trying to slide the scales a bit more. This year I'm going to do even more producing. I'm going to do
Hmm.
even more mixing. And yeah, and fortunately, unfortunately, I don't really gig anymore. I think if something came up, I feel like hopefully I would still get the call from Ryan Roxie to go and do a little UK tour or to go and do a little bit of this and a bit of that, and I would be open to it. But I don't know. There is something that I just love coming into this little studio of mine and still getting to creatively work on music
Yeah.
and not have to lift a Fender Twin.
Right. Try a Fender Hot Rod DeVille. Those are even heavier. Um,
Yeah.
so, um, how did you get hooked up with Ryan? Like, tell me, Ryan, as a reminder to our listeners, Ryan Roxie plays with Alice Cooper,
Hmm.
Detroit legend.
Indeed. Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I'm curious, like, how did you guys get connected? How did you start playing with him? How did that transition to doing production for him?
Okay,
Give me that whole spiel.
this is a good story. Okay, so when I was 10 years old, I went to my first Alice Cooper concert.
Okay, so
So
you were down from a
I was
very
down
early
from the
age.
beginning, and it was my very first gig. Now get this, um, it was Dio, Ronnie James Dio,
Okay.
and Alice Cooper. Right, so we've got
Would have been like Be My Frankenstein era
no,
Alice?
this was a little later than that. This was actually in
Okay.
2000,
Okay. Okay.
and it was Wembley Arena. And my dad and I really got into Alice Cooper because my dad was a big Alice Cooper fan, and had all the records. But it was I feel like I can there's it's just a cool thing to say. I got to see Ronnie James Dio, so he opened for Alice Cooper at Wembley Arena, my very first concert, and that was a big stage show. It was called the Brutal Planet Tour, and Ryan Roxie came out and he had this glittery guitar and these big platinum blonde dreadlocks. The whole band looked amazing, but I just kept watching this guitarist, and I was like,
Okay.
and I was remembered to like asking my dad, so like he tomorrow night they're playing the same, they're doing it again somewhere else, and my dad was like, yeah, they're gonna do that around the world now, and I was like, I just knew from that moment I had to play guitar and do something like this. It was just like one of those moments where you just like what they say, the penny dropped, where I was just like,
Hmm.
okay, this might be it. And so believe it or not, I can't say for sure the year, but it could have been that year, it could have been the year later, I don't know. But I found his email address like as a 10 or 11-year-old, and I sent him an
Okay.
email and I was like, hey, I saw you at Wembley Arena, it was amazing. And lo and behold, I got a response. And and then 2003 or whenever Alice Cooper would come around again, and there was no social media. I emailed Ryan, "Are you playing with Alice Cooper again? I'm coming to this show." And it just kind of progressed from there, where I just
Okay.
like as a young teenager would email him, and he was always kind enough to send me an email back. And then occasionally would be like, "Hey, like if you and your buddy want to, leave a couple of guest passes, come back and say hi to the band and whatnot." And then as I just got older, and I didn't know if this was the right thing to do or not, but I would message him and be like, "Hey, my band's released a demo CD.
Yeah.
Take a listen." Or this is my MySpace. I just made a song. Will you take a listen? And I used to update him with what I was doing. He
Hmm.
never asked for any of this. I just did it. And so, this little rapport started building. And then, many years down the line, Ryan said, "I'm coming to the UK. I want to do a little UK tour. Can you help me set it up? Me and you will play guitar." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, are you kidding me? I get to back up, a guitar hero of mine." So we did that. And then the couple of years later, it was, "Hey, I want to come and do a whole band tour. Do you want to play guitar for that too?" And so that happened. And then in 2007, I'm missing a lot here, but in 2017, like I said, I moved to the States, and I met up with Ryan at an Alice Cooper show, and I just planted the seed and said, "Look, if you ever need if you ever need someone for a US thing, or if you ever need more of another guitarist in what you're doing, I just want to be involved more." And he was like, "Okay." And he didn't say anything. He was like, "Okay, cool. Thanks for letting me know." And we had our hamburger or whatever.
Hmm.
And then a couple of weeks later, he messaged me and said, "There's going to be a US tour with a couple of other guys. I'm going to go and play all my solo music. Do you want to be involved?" And it was one of those things where, like, if I hadn't had asked him, I'm not sure I would have got the call for that one.
Hmm.
Um, and so this has been a thing that I've just kind of always done now. And I guess I learned from, those early years of messaging him and also other bands and speaking to other musicians and whatnot. It's like, um, if you don't ask, you don't get.
Right.
That's always, and now that's just my motto for everything. And so fast forward even more years where I know Ryan extremely well. I, um, I don't know if I said to him, "Let me mix one of your songs" or not, but I was still doing the same thing I was doing when I was 13. I would message him like, "Hey man, like I just mixed this band. What do you think?"
Yeah.
I was just always pushing my stuff on him, and he was always open to it. Um, and then he asked me to do a single, and then that turned into another single, and it's turning into a few more things. And now we work. We have this really collaborative music production, sometimes songwriting thing that happens.
Hmm.
So it's been what was that, a 27-year long
Yeah.
game or whatever it is. Like, no, not 27 years, but a long enough 20 years maybe of just well, hold on a minute,
No,
27.
you're
No,
20.
yeah, I
If
was
you
right,
if you
wasn't
met
I?
him
Oh,
when he was
God.
10, yeah. Sorry
Yeah,
to break it
so
to you.
gosh. So anyway, I taught myself something through all of that, which is sometimes you find these people, you can cling on to them a little bit, respectfully, but I was always just updating him with and other people with what I was doing, and it
Right.
seemed to have paid off. And so
Well, I think
anyway,
you kind of hit on what
yeah,
the purpose of this podcast is really about, which is, if you believe in yourself, right? And you know that, like, whether it's the passion that you have for it as a 10-year-old, where, you're starting to learn how to play music, and music is becoming, part of your life, and you're finding out about new music, and you're going to see Alice Cooper with your dad,
hmm
and if you're especially someone like you who seems like a very like observant person, where you're like identifying like, okay, that's Alice Cooper, but like, who's this other
who's
guy?
that
Like,
guy?
what's
Yeah,
the role that
yes,
he's playing in this
exactly.
whole thing? And just having the like bravery and, the like, I guess like the detective skills too, to sort of figure out like, how do I get in touch with this person? And I think some people could look at that and go like, well, you're just trying to like, like insert yourself into this, or like, glom onto somebody else's thing that they've already built. But like,
Ride the
how do you
coattails.
think Ryan
Yeah.
Roxie got to play with Alice Cooper? I mean, I'm sure some of it was his talent and his ability to like, rip, uh, you know, uh, schools out or whatever, and he auditioned and did all that. But like, there's also the asking, there's also the networking, there's also the like, the persistence, I think is like the word that, really applies here, that you need to have to get your foot in the door, right? And you mentioned respectfully, and I think that, some people do it disrespectfully, and it is a turn off, and they probably don't get the chances maybe that they would if they were, you know, uh, not trying to like punish the person or whatever, and it's more of like, hey, I'm just, I'm a fan, and but we're
Yeah.
also human beings, and like, I think it's important to have those people in your life too, where you can send things to and like get their opinion and feedback, and it builds your confidence. Like, there's so much in what really boils down to me to like a simple yet not easy for everybody to do act, which is just ask, right? Like a
Just
lot of
ask.
a lot of
My
my
gosh.
early, like fortunes in music came from simply just asking to play a show with a band. Asking if, where can I send this demo? You know, um, would you be interested in X, Y, and Z, right? And what's the worst that can happen? They say no.
Yeah, that's all they
And then
say. Yeah. And then you
you
move
know,
on. That's what happens. By the way, if anyone can hear, there might be a 14-month-old crying in the background there. But
okay, well, if you
um,
have to do any
no,
rescuing,
I'm good. I'm good.
you're
Unless we
well.
have to do
Let's
some audio rescuing. But
no, no,
yeah,
can't hear
you're
it.
you're absolutely right. And Ryan, he's just always been sweet enough to just listen, and be open to things that I've sent him, and yeah, just asking. And that is also kind of how me and you have met. Like, this is
Yeah.
I do this every day, and it's not ever to I'm not necessarily throwing mud at the wall, but I'm like, I reach out to people where I'm like,
Hmm.
this it's not just always about the music, but this person seems driven. What are they? I want to collaborate with them. Why wouldn't I
Sure.
want to collaborate with
Hmm.
them? So, you know, reaching out to people and people that you admire and say, just throw it out there. It's not going to come to you. Is what I'm trying to say. Like, you kind of have to go and grab this stuff.
Well, the boomerang doesn't throw itself, right?
Oh, I like
I
that.
just made that up, but
You heard it here
literally, I mean,
first.
that is what it feels like sometimes,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And like, sometimes you throw it and it gets caught in a tree and it doesn't return, right? And
Yeah.
you're like, okay, well, let me find the next boomerang and maybe the next throw will be better,
Yeah.
and it isn't like necessarily done in this like gross self-serving like I'm gonna like schmooze my way and like take
Hmm.
advantage of somebody or whatever. For your relationship with Ryan, for example, and even like what we're doing right now, there's kind of this like equal exchange, right? Like, you know, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, we build each other up, we create this like, you know, opportunity for one another to kind of help prop each other up and give each other
Absolutely.
opportunities to do things. And,
Yeah.
I think that's what when I was a kid, growing up and playing music, like, at DIY venues and things like that, like that's how it happens. Like people
Yeah.
helping other people do a thing that,
You
you
trade
know,
shows, you help each other,
exactly.
you
Like,
trade amps, you do all
yeah,
this kind
like,
of stuff. Yeah.
can we borrow your drums so we can make
Yeah.
this easier? And the changeover times goes faster. And and at that point, it's about communication and collaboration and maybe dialing your ego down just a little bit and saying, like,
Yep.
I'd like to play my own drums, but I know it's more important for the show to run on time,
Yep.
than for me to have my drum kit there so I can play them, you know what I mean? So, anyway, I commend you, and I think that
Oh,
is a really good parlay or kind of bridge to the next question I have. So
okay.
you and I were hooked up by a mutual friend of ours, Scotty Hagan,
Yes,
who
indeed.
runs Bellyache Records.
Well,
Scotty puts out Ryan Roxie's records
that's
and
right.
is a huge Alice Cooper fan. I've known Scotty, gosh, for 20 plus years, 25. I mean, probably since I started playing live shows, I mean,
That's right.
Scotty was in a lot of cool bands from around here, worked at different record stores, and he's just one of those people that like, and he's a redhead. So, got to shout out Scotty Hagan. But he connected us, and it was based off of this thing that we were just talking about, which is you kind of, you know, um, I'm sure, as your confidence has grown as a producer, as a mixer, as an, engineer, as a mastering, um, what do you call, as a masterer? Is it mastering
Mastering engineer.
engineer? Okay.
Yeah.
I want to
Yep.
get the terminology right. I should know that. But, your confidence grows, right? So you start to look for more opportunities, and that led to you and I getting hooked up. Certainly, I'm not, at the same level as like even a Ryan Roxie, who's, you know, has the Alice Cooper connection and a big fan base. But um, we made an EP together. It's called
Yep.
"They're Coming for Us." You produced it, you mixed it, you mastered it. Um, First, I want to, just dig more into like the process that you kind of like. How did you I don't want to make this about me necessarily because that's
No, we
not
should.
where I'm going
Yeah.
with it, but what was it that made you kind of want to get connected, we'll say with a person like me who makes the kind of music that I make?
Well, me and you definitely have, we share a lot of favorite music and
Hmm.
artists. Like, when I think of my favorite, if I want, if I was to have to go and play in one of these bands, but if I was to make music, I want to make music like Fountains of Wayne and my number one. Some people is Led Zeppelin, some people is Cheap Trick. Fountains of Wayne are my number one band
Hmm.
ever. Um, but then other power pop bands like Cheap Trick, um, Elvis Costello,
Hmm.
like huge heroes and inspiration to me. And it was clear to hear from your music, Ryan, that I could hear all that sort of stuff in what you do too.
Hmm.
Now, I've also always had my finger on the pulse of the current power pop world, and I would see your name come up a few times, and then it just so happened that I know Scotty had a connection with you.
Hmm.
And then, Scotty was really sweet. He sent me one of your records once, and this was like
Oh,
actually
okay.
a few years ago,
Hmm.
quite a few years ago, and I loved that record. And I've always just like kept a little finger on the pulse of like, okay, what's Ryan Allen doing? What's Extra
Hmm.
Arms doing?
Hmm.
Um, and then I was like, I need to reach out to this guy. Like, I need to, you know, what's the worst that can happen? You can only say no. So that
Right.
was, that was
I
it.
was like,
So
yeah, sounds good.
so yeah, so it was like one of those things of like, I just feel like when you reach out to someone with intention and you truly like what they're doing, There's no losing at all in anything. And yeah,
Right.
things might not progress to anything. But yeah, so I've got to always be into the music and be into the what the people are doing. You're an
Hmm.
active musician, you release music all the time, you've released so many songs, you write such good songs. So for me it was like a no-brainer.
Well,
So
thank you. I
that's what
appreciate
I'm
it. And
always
I'm,
looking for.
yeah, and I appreciate you, taking that chance, not that like reaching out to me as some big, yeah, I'm just like a dad, who makes like, teenage fan club rip-off songs. But um, you know, our process, right? Like, and I would assume that this is a similar process that you engage with Ryan or some of the other artists you've worked with, where for us at least, I recorded the tracks at my house, with
Yep.
some very minimal, not like super expensive equipment. Like I think when we first started talking, I was like, yeah, I just like got an SM and I put it on my box and I have some
Yep.
cheap drum mics and this is how I kind of do it. Um, but I basically sent you the tracks, no processing on them, very raw, very dry. You get the tracks, right? Kind of in this big track dump. And for us, it was like, let's start with one song, and it became three,
Yeah.
which is very me. But um, I'm curious, like when you get tracks like that, like what is your like? Talk to me a little bit more, like inside baseball, I guess,
Okay.
style about
Yeah.
like what is your process? Like, okay, I received the tracks. You actually just made a video where you talked about this a little bit, where you
Yeah.
asked me for some like rough mixes that I had done on my own. So you could maybe like uh, talk about that a little bit too. But I'm just curious, when you get this raw kind of like track dump to work with, like what do you first start doing? How do you get it to a place where you're like, okay, I've elevated this and I've brought this to a different place than it would have been if either Ryan did it on his own or if you'd heard the rawness of the tracks and you were explaining this to somebody who really doesn't even understand mixing and production, like how would you describe what you did to make them sound better? And you don't have to get super technical, but just
Okay.
like what's your process and what do you go through to kind of bring these things to life?
Well, the cliche is real of like if you volume balance everything and you pan things nicely to make
Hmm.
it feel like you're watching a band, if that's
Right.
what you want to go for,
Right.
or you want it to hug your ears a bit more, maybe you want really wide drums, you'll pan them bigger. But um, volume and panning is really the foundational thing. You don't have to
Hmm.
be a producer or a mixer to do that. You could
Right.
say to your friend, you could say to your dad, whatever, like, hey, like here's some faders, move it around until it sounds good.
Right. It's like the
They
mirepoix of
Yeah,
recording. It's
yeah,
the
they will
carrots,
have an
the celery, and the onions
exactly,
where it's
yeah,
in the
they will
mix.
have an
Yeah.
opinion of what should be louder or not.
Sure.
If you
Sure.
if you got your dad to mix guitars, bass, and drums, and then you got your another family member to do the same thing, they would change it a little bit. It would sound a little
Sure.
different to everyone's ears, but like everyone has an opinion of what they want to hear. So you definitely don't have to be a producer or a mixing engineer or know anything about compression or EQ to be able to just do that. And ultimately, I still think that's like the most important thing. So
Yeah.
when I get,
Well, it's
you
like a
know,
live performance, right? You have certainly you can apply reverb and compression and some of these things. There's a crossover, a carryover from
yeah,
live to producing and mixing records, but
yeah,
you know, the kind of like if you can close your eyes and envision a stage, right? Like if there's four people on that stage, you've got, one person's on the left, one person's on the right, the drums are in the back,
yeah,
the vocalist is out front, and you're almost trying to kind of recreate that like live mix,
yeah,
in a recording environment, right?
yeah,
First, right?
yeah,
Just to establish that like foundation. And
yeah,
like you said, yeah, a lot of that has to do with just like panning things correctly, and making sure the volume for each component is at a place where it makes sense for the song, I would imagine, right? But
exactly.
then from
Yeah.
there, kind of what's the next, like, is there polishing? Are you applying EQs? And I actually have another question, which is based off of something that I read, where you kind of mix in the box,
Yeah.
and so it maybe incorporate kind of what that means, and like
Hmm.
what that, or even what that means to you, for the listener, so they kind of understand like this is the Robby Miller like approach, you know?
Right. Okay. Well, I'm not sure if it's really that big, if that is that cool or a unique of approach, but
You can
certainly.
pretend it is
Okay.
because
Well, this is the Robbie Miller approach, then, ladies and gentlemen.
brand
Okay.
it. Yes,
So,
exactly. Thank you.
um, we've got the raw tracks. Hey, they sound good. Their volume, their pans. Okay, this sounds. This I can hear the song. I can understand what the song's doing. I can hear the vocals nicely. I can hear there's drums in there. Now the next thing to do, something that we usually, or I've been guilty of doing too quick, is start like just doing things of like, well, that needs EQing, that needs compression. I've got to make that like that. That needs to be brighter sounding. And you kind of, if you're not careful, you just start doing all this sort of stuff by habit. But that
Mhm.
still might not be what the track asks for. So actually, when I start a new session these days, my mixing template these days doesn't have any plugins on it. It's completely, there's nothing on it. It's
Okay.
just the volume and the
So
and the
you're
plugin.
not gonna let the plugins dictate the direction. You're saying, let me take the rawness of the song,
Yeah.
let me get this panning and the sort of volume to at least a good place where obviously things change a little bit when you add, you know,
Yes.
some of the EQs and
Yeah.
all of that and the processing and stuff. But so you don't start with like vocal already has this,
I try not
plug-in,
to. Yeah,
stacked on top.
yeah.
And you
No,
let
I'm
the song sort of dictate what you decide to add to it.
exactly. At least that's what I always like. That's what I want to try and do.
And do you feel like
Sometimes
that
you
kind
get
of
too
goes,
excited.
do you feel like that goes back to your early days of learning how to play music in such a like raw and like, like you're literally in a room with these wooden things like trying to make sound? Like, do you feel like there's a
A
connection
primitive
between
kind
that?
of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
Yeah, maybe there is that. Because a good song is a good song whether it's mixed well or
exactly.
not.
Yep.
So but then the next step would be like, okay, are the bass and the drums working nicely together? I can't really hear the kick drum anymore. Why is
Hmm.
that? Well, it's because the bass is maybe like in that area where the kick drum lives. So I can maybe like round off the bass in that area. So now I can hear the kick drum. Okay, cool. So there's always this sort of balancing, molding,
Hmm.
just almost like playing with clay in your hands. Like,
Yeah.
does it look like a pot yet?
Right.
Keep working at it, keep working
Right.
at it. So that's kind of what this is all about. And but it's also nice to have direction from the artist when who you're mixing for. And so they might say, I this is inspired by Teenage Fan Club.
Hmm.
Can you try and maybe make that even more so.
Right.
And
Right.
obviously the song has that inspiration, but like, can we get that in the production? And then
Right.
when I listen to a bunch of Teenage Fan Club, and I'm hearing lots of jangly, bright
Hmm.
sounds. I'm like, okay, cool. So this and it might have been that I was already going to do that, but like, okay, this
Hmm.
validates what I was going to do.
Sure.
So, yeah, so that's kind of the whole idea. But back to that video that I was talking, that quick little Instagram reel I did.
Hmm.
Gotta have it from the beginning, man. You can't fake this stuff. And maybe in 10 years' time, or even 10
I
months'
think you
time, the
can
way
fake it
AI, the
now,
way AI is
unfortunately. Yeah.
going, yeah, maybe you can fake the energy. Maybe you can fake like the punkness, but I don't know. I'm not
Yeah.
sure if it's ever going to be there. But
I sure
yeah,
hope not. I
I sure
really
hope
hope
not
not.
too.
Yeah.
But there's, I can't. If someone's gonna just tickle the strings through their, Les Paul into a Vox amp, and then expect it to sound like the Buzzcocks, or expect it to sound like the Ramones when the mix is done, it's just like there's no plugin in the world, and
Yeah.
I am not good enough to ever make that happen.
Sure.
So you got to be really slamming on that guitar, and you got to really be playing it like the
Yeah.
Ramones, and
Yeah.
then there's not much else to do, apart from
Right.
like
Right.
make it fit the place. So hopefully
Well,
that answers the question.
to kind of paraphrase what you're saying, I think that like your experience as a musician and your ability and as a songwriter too, and must certainly impact how you approach these things, right? Like I feel like this isn't always true, but when you play music with people, and for example, like if you're playing with a drummer who can also play guitar, they
Yeah,
probably play drums in a much different way than a drummer who just plays drums.
yeah,
And that's no slight on drummers who only play drums, but like the drummer I play with right now, Jordan, his first instrument was guitar,
yeah,
and So he understands, kind of like, okay, like this is the song, and here's where I need to kind of get out of the way. Here's where I have some like windows of opportunity to like do a flashy thing or something clever or whatever. But it's never like fighting over the song to be, you know, to put a spotlight maybe on an instrument that or a component of the song that isn't necessarily like the focal point, right? Like the melody is the focal point, the lyrics are maybe the
Yeah.
focal point, and that isn't true for every type of music. But in that example, I think, having a drummer who understands what you're doing, and then vice versa, like I play drums, right? So I understand what he's doing, and
Hmm.
it makes it a lot easier to put something together. And the song is always the thing that gets like the kind of like attention. That's the thing that deserves the respect. And it sounds like your mix to, or I'm sorry, your approach to mixing, producing, is very similar, where the song is guiding things, not your
Yeah.
like I'm a production wizard and I'm going to sprinkle all this like fairy dust on things and it's going to come out sounding magical. And I have the cure for poorly played, no energy,
Yeah.
music or what, like it just sounds like you really respect the composition, you respect what goes into the original like spark and idea of the song,
Hmm.
and then you're just fostering it to this next level to to and again in a way that giving the music and the tracks the respect they deserve, if in fact they deserve your respect
Yeah,
to
well, I
begin
think,
with. But
yeah, and the other thing is with me is like I really struggle just being a mixing engineer, even though I love mixing. Really, I wear all the hats, and
right.
I don't know, maybe it's a jack of all trades, master of none kind of approach. But for me, it, if you're gonna mix something, like I don't think I can sleep at night thinking like this song would just sound so much better if we got rid of that guitar and we just
Hmm.
added this in. And I just
Hmm.
know that this would be great.
Well,
And
and you
most
you
people
did
are really
that.
open to it.
You did that for me, right? So let's talk about that for a second. So
Yeah.
there's the like, let's make it sound better in terms of like, again, EQ, panning, volume, processing, right? But then there's the song
Hmm.
too. And I know you reached out to me a couple of times through the session and we were like, there's this guitar part that's like competing with the vocal melody, and I feel like something simpler could work here. Do you mind if I play it?
Yeah.
Or even just something as simple as like, I think like a little like woo or a hey or something
Yeah.
would sound good in this moment, which I think I was like in between 6,000 things and I just recorded it
You
on
did
my
it on your
voice memo,
iPhone. I
and
love
I
that.
just sent
Yeah.
it to you and it sounded cool. But
Well, and you were open enough, to, and most people are
mhm,
really appreciate that thing of
yeah,
like, where you just feel like, because you do care. I'm not faking that, I really do care, like how every single song that I work on, whether it's going to be listened to 100,000 times, a million times, or 10 times,
yeah,
if I'm working on it, I care about it. And so, you were nice enough, sweet enough to say, yeah, like absolutely, like try that out and let's see how it goes. And then that's just like how really great collaboration. That's just everything is going into the greater good,
yeah.
like to
Well,
make
when you
everything
do it on your own, right? Like you're in a
it's hard.
vacuum with it, and
Yeah.
that's a choice. Like I
Yeah.
could record things with a band. This particular EP, I played all the instruments on it, save
Mm,
for some of the stuff that you added. And I want to come back to that because I think that, part again of this podcast is like trying to find things about people that maybe might not be as known as others in their respective line of work or
mm-hmm.
whatever. But like why you, right? Like what is it about you that would make somebody like me, somebody maybe in their mid 40s who still like is making cool music but kind of trying to figure out like, how do I do this now, with the economy the way it is and my age
Mm-hmm.
and my responsibilities, and having something like, in addition to making your song sound better, I can also offer up some suggestions
Mm-hmm.
from a production perspective. I can play multiple instruments. I hear this. You know, uh, I don't feel like I should hold back in making these, like, and so I think that that's an aspect to you that is really like important for people to know, is like you're not just doing the production, or I'm sorry, you're not just doing the like, you know, technical cleaning up of a song. You're also listening to it for opportunities to make the song better. And
Yeah.
you have the ability to also, execute on those things if
Yeah.
needed, right? So
Yeah.
you've got this Swiss Army knife kind of, aspect to you, which I think is really appealing. And, you
Thank
know,
you.
hopefully, I mean, not every producer, not every person that is going to mix a record is going to do that, right? So I think, if anybody listening who's in the same boat as me, especially, or anybody, this can be anyone, but I would say, definitely reach out to Robbie, because
Thanks.
there's part of it is, again, making your song just maybe elevated in terms of like what you could potentially do on your own, but also if you want to work with somebody who's cares enough to like make those suggestions. And the suggestion you made, I think it was in This Ugly, in the chorus, you just kind of added this like two note, kind
It's
of
just
back
two
and
strings. Yeah.
forth,
Boom, boom,
just,
boom, boom.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it made it so much better, because
Mm.
sometimes it's hard to get out of your own head and you're like, okay, like, I think the original guitar part was kind of emulating the melody of the
Mm-hmm.
vocal melody, and it was kind of following along, which is cool. And it's like a Weezer Nirvana thing to do,
Yeah. It was really
which are
cool.
two of
Yeah.
my favorite bands. But like, there was also other things happening where it just became more jumbled and like detracted or distracted from what is like the most important part of the song, which is the melody and the lyrics, right? So, you made such a simple suggestion, you played such a simple part, but it made it so much better.
That's
And
what I
so,
needed. Yeah, that's what I
yeah.
needed. And then to that point, because I think you said, "Oh, you should really do a guitar solo on this track," and I was like, "Yeah, okay, I could do that." And then when I listened to it, I was like, "No, the guitar solo you did is so perfect for that song." I think that was This Ugly too. That's the
Yeah, the
same
little
song.
chugly, like
Yeah, but
thin
it it
thin
it
Lizzy kind of
it
thing.
really really worked, and I just when you're mixing a song, you do start to hear things over and over and over again. You
Yeah.
start to fall in love with certain things, and at the end of the day I was like, I have to be really, and I'm never one to refuse, shredding it up on someone's song. It's always like
Mhm.
what I love to do. I love that, but I was just like, I don't know actually if I did this, if the song would be better for it. I just
Right.
feel like what you did was great. So, you know,
Well, restraint and, like dynamic, like considerations are very important. And I think in the genre of music that I make, especially because, there is it's very easy to just want to like be full on everything happening at the same time, you know, four on the floor, just like blasting your way through it. Um, but even on like They're Coming for Us, which is like a very punk song,
yeah,
you added little ear candy things like a little delay on the vocal at one point,
yeah,
where there's like a stop, or you like stripped out, I think we kept like the running kick drum coming in, but there
yeah,
originally was like two strikes on the guitar, but you stripped one of them out,
yeah,
and it just created even more space,
yeah.
and when I'm creating something in a vacuum again,
It's hard
I
to
don't
see
have
it.
anybody to turn to and go like,
Yeah.
should we do that once or twice? And so sending those tracks to you, it's kind of like Christmas, like opening a gift on Christmas Day when you get stuff back and you hear somebody else's interpretation of even what you've done, and you're just like, wow, like I didn't think about that,
Mhm.
and sometimes it catches you off guard and you're like, should it be that?
Mhm.
And a lot of the times I think, my advice to people would be like, listen to it a couple times. Don't
Yes.
listen to it once and just make your decision right away, because, you know, there's a certain amount of like vulnerability at play when you're like handing your music over to somebody else. And
Yeah,
then you get it
absolutely.
back and it's like, okay, here's how I heard it.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can catch you off guard, and people who are maybe a little more precious about what they do, which I am certainly like the type of person who, I mean, I very much care about every aspect of it, but as I've grown, as I've aged, I've become less precious about like having
Mm.
it, needing it to be perfect, or needing it to be exactly the idea that I had. So I just really appreciate that about you, and I want
Mm.
to make sure that
Wow.
that's like,
Thank you.
communicated here, because I think that um, doesn't always get the like respect and attention that it needs, deserves when it comes to these kinds of like collaborative, efforts. And I just really appreciate that you were, passionate about my songs and wanting to make them better. um, Obviously it's mutually beneficial, right? But like, um, yeah, I just think that that's an aspect of what you do that needs to be like recognized. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I know we've been going for a while. I have a few more questions for you.
Yep.
So if you're cool with it, I'm
Yeah, of
gonna get
course.
into kind of a slightly different topic, which is, really digging into the purpose again of this podcast, which
Yeah.
is why, like I don't think it's like worth necessarily like analyzing like why some people are known for what they do and why some people might be lesser known for what they do, because you can't really control that, right? But I am curious, like what is sort of like the hardest thing about doing what you're doing right now and the musical landscape of today, is it finding clients? Is it standing out in a sea of, other people making records in their house and doing kind of this like send me your tracks and I'll, get them, cleaned up or
Hmm.
whatever? Is it even like pricing related? Like what is, this is kind of more like businessy stuff, but like what are some of the challenges that you're kind of faced with, trying to get work and doing what you're doing?
I would just say, like, obviously the market is very saturated. It's just, man, I just think if it wasn't one thing, it would be another. So it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what the problem
Yeah.
is. Not if you even want to call it a problem, but look,
Right.
every, once upon a time, you could only make an album or a song if you went to an actual recording studio. It's one of my cats
Hmm.
breaking down the door. If you went into a recording studio and you paid money and you were there and you had 6 hours and you got to get everything done, right? And
Right.
then all of a sudden, everyone has a laptop and everyone can record at home
Hmm.
or whatever. So that affected the recording, the brick and mortar recording studios.
Sure.
um well, hey, I'm a mixing engineer, I'm a producer, I can do this. Well, now everyone's got a laptop, so everyone's a mixing engineer actually, or a
Right.
producer. Okay. And they're a mastering engineer because you've got plugins that will just do it for you. You really, that is a real thing. So um I think, just it's saturated, but it's always kind of, that's always been the case, I think, no matter what timeline we're working on here. So
Right.
yeah, I guess um, everyone's mixing, everyone's producing, and for good reason. That could be financially, well, I could just do this, or I can maybe,
Hmm.
you know, do the best I can. Actually, it doesn't sound too bad. Let's release it.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and so power to that. So I think a lot of it for me is like sometimes convincing people that I really love your music and I really have some great ideas. And if you're open to it, I think we can create something really cool.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, that's
and
basically what you said to me,
right.
and I think flattery is like a, it's a key that can open doors, right? And I think especially like if you're someone again like me, who's, I've had some success in music. It's,
Mm,
as a younger person especially, and I'm still very grateful for, any to anybody who pays attention to what I'm doing, but like, sometimes there's days where you're just like, why am I doing this? Nobody
yeah.
cares, blah
Yeah.
blah blah. You're like, having your own little pity party, and
And
then
then bing, Robbie Miller.
somebody like
Hey.
Robbie Miller is like, "Hey man, I like what and it inspires you." And I feel like when you reached out to me, like, again, we like just talked about doing one song, but then I got really excited and had some of these other things. And the way my brain works is like, oh, I could do like a thing where like
Yeah.
it could be sort of these like political songs and address some of the things going on in the world right now. And
Yeah.
it can kind of be this little package, and you were game for it. But the again, like the flattery and the compliments, uh, it definitely made me like, I think, as an artist, like when you send your record out to get reviewed, right? And you read a review that's a regurgitation of the bio that you sent or the
Yeah.
press release that you sent,
Hmm.
it's frustrating. Like I appreciate any like anybody who takes the time to like write about, something that I've created and put it on a blog or in a magazine or whatever. And I still am fortunate to get some attention in that way.
Yeah.
But when I do read this somebody who's like basically retelling the thing that I just sent them about the thing,
Hmm.
it's it's a bit deflating because it indicates that maybe, they're not willing to go deeper,
Yeah.
or they're not really in it for the evaluation of the music
Yeah.
itself. It's more just to have content on their
Yes.
website or something,
Yeah.
and so when you talk to people like yourself, when you're someone like me who not only like is offering a service to you, but like actually takes the time to like understand what you're trying to do, can have a discourse, and can communicate like what they think about what you're doing, and I started this commentary talking about reviews. Like the best reviews are the ones that like actually
You
the
didn't
the
ask
writer
for.
is
Yeah.
offering their
Yeah.
opinion on,
Yeah.
the songs or the
Yeah.
production or the lyrics, and they're actually digging into it, and so someone like you, who's able to have that, like, uh able to articulate those things, it's immediately gives me confidence and trust that like you're not just some dude with a laptop, and Logic, who's going to put a couple plugins on my shit and send it back to me and charge me, X
And
amount to,
yeah,
you know what I mean? So
extortion the
like,
man to do it.
so
Yeah.
I
Well,
think
rest
that's
assured.
important, to kind of
Yeah.
highlight.
Rest assured, if you get a DM from me, if I find you
Hmm.
and you get a DM from me, just know, I've listened to your music
Right.
and I like it. And that's
It's
why I'm reaching
intention.
out.
It's intentional,
It's all
right?
intentional.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm reaching out because I'd love to work with you. And, I'd love to release something and collaborate and put my services out there, of course. And, it's because I really like the music.
Hmm.
And I sometimes I do mix songs I don't necessarily love,
Sure.
but I still find something in them that makes me love parts of them.
Hmm.
Or I say to the songwriter, hey, I think, going back to that collaboration thing, hey, what about this? And when they say, yeah, that's a great idea, it's like, oh, cool. Now I'm even more invested in this
Hmm.
song. So yeah, so I think, to break through the saturation of everyone being a mixing engineer and a producer, and I've collaborated, I'm not collaborated, I've contributed to that problem. I understand and appreciate that as well. I guess I'm just always trying to just like cut my way through a little bit more by just having hopefully what feels like an authentic approach of I want to do this, or if you reach out to me, I love this song, let's do it like this. What do you think to it? So there's,
Right. Well,
I just can't.
you're in customer service, right?
Yes,
In a
yeah,
way, right? And I think that like when you have like a really good interaction with somebody who's in customer service, whether it's over the phone, and I mean this in very general terms, right? Or if you're at a store or something and somebody is like very, like, helpful to you, and like if you can't find something, whatever it is, right? If you're working with somebody who's like actually, kind and respectful, and you're, able to kind of like accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, I think that goes a long way, right? Like kindness and, you
yeah.
know, some of these like very simple human
It's
things
only
that like people
connecting.
forget, right? So it's,
It's like when you go to a
you've got your,
restaurant.
right.
You go to a restaurant and you're like,
Yeah.
I'll get this, this, and that, and they're like, you know what? Don't get that. That
Hmm.
sucks. Get the appetizer in this, and it actually works out $12 cheaper.
Yeah. And you're like drawn
Okay,
in all of a sudden.
yeah,
Yeah. Right.
I will
You're like,
do
I
that. Thank
trust
you
this
so much.
person.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
when there's that, you remember that restaurant, you remember that server. Hopefully, you leave them a nice tip,
And
and
you're probably going to come back, right?
and you're probably gonna come back.
Yeah.
So yeah, it goes a long way, and it's not just in music, like in that example, it's in everything. Just be a nice person. That's
Right.
really
No, I
what it
mean,
is.
I played a show last night, and that's kind of what I was. There was a moment where I was just talking about like we've kind of hit rock bottom as a country right now,
Mm,
and like we've kind of lost touch with just like human like interaction, and like how important being kind to one another, and we can be like have different opinions about politics and all these things, but like it doesn't mean we have to fucking hate each other. It doesn't mean we
yeah,
have to be assholes to each other,
no.
so anyway, I want to move on to
Okay.
something related, but like what are the, obviously like reaching out to people is a big part of your process, but what are the other ways that you try to get the word out? You're pretty active on social, right? Like you've been a
Hmm.
little bit more active recently, than
Yeah.
maybe when we first connected. So, what are some of the other things in your playbook to just try to get the word out about you?
Um, well, I guess like doing my best to make content, even though I really hate making it, I guess. So I just know when I same thing. If you ever get DM from me, if I release something, it's because I really wanted to make that video.
Hmm.
I really struggle to just make stuff for the sake of it. Maybe it's a little bit like songwriting with you. Um, it's really hard for me to just like put a post out when I'm just not really feeling into it.
Sure.
I always think, my wife is really my best friend. So like whatever I'm excited to tell her about is probably a good thing that I should post about or I should
Yeah.
make. That's kind of the way I
I,
gauge
I, I
things.
like that
Yeah.
barometer. Yeah.
So and yeah, so that's what I try and do. I do have a little YouTube channel as well called Can't Afford to Record, and that's where I like put up really nerdy stuff about compressors and equalizers and
Okay.
production stuff. So which I think is important. I really think, singer songwriters like yourself and whatnot, like you're doing a lot of the hard work yourself just by recording. And so I feel like when I mix pretty much everything I mix for, people have had some kind of involvement in recording or production or doing it, some of it themselves. So
Hmm.
I like to have that channel as a way for me to like nerd out and geek out a bit more about that sort of stuff. So if you are interested in recording and mixing yourself, you might find some value there.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, I guess, but here's the thing, Ryan, like I'm just, I'm always looking for the next thing that I should be doing.
Hmm.
Every day I'm thinking, okay, what could I be doing better? How could I reach out to people better? How can I consume music better? How can I be a better mixing engineer? How can I, connect with people better? I guess like, it all starts to become the same sort of thing, but I'm
Yeah.
always thinking like there's not just one way to do anything. So if I can find a better way of doing something and I can find it and I can figure it out, then I'm always going to try and do that. So,
Hmm.
I think, of course I do the content stuff. But I'm always looking for the next little formula that I can
Right.
try. Maybe it's Substack.
I it's where I get most of my news. I'll tell you that.
Yeah,
But yeah,
well,
no, I
yeah.
think I think I think that that's um, we're kind of in this like constant. Not everybody, but people like yourself and myself, I would say. We're in this constant like uh, you know um, era of refinement, right?
Yeah.
Like we're not satisfied probably ever.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I always think I could do things better. And I'm very comfortable, like, you know, accepting that, like, okay, like the song came out this way, and maybe there's like something in there where I'm not 100% sure if I really love, but I accept that it's done now,
Yeah.
you know? But instead of like going backwards and trying to, or like agonizing about those things, it's like, okay, how can I learn from this circumstance and then
Yeah.
continue to evolve and refine what I do for the next time I do it, right?
100%. Yeah.
And I think that that's life in general, right? Like it doesn't matter if you're creative or not. I think the people who, there's a lot of people who don't want to evolve and a lot of people who don't want to refine what they do, and they're just very happy sitting around, just kind of sad to say, but maybe just waiting to die. I don't know, right? But like then there's other people
Yeah.
out there who are like striving for, I wouldn't even call it perfection, but they're just striving to be the best version of themselves in that moment that they possibly can be. And when you're creative and when you're making things that are forever, right? Like once, you know, when they're coming for us hits Bandcamp and the streaming services, like there it is,
Yeah.
like there's no
People
going back.
people forget that too as well. Like I think that's kind of something that it's not really like I'm not really a pitchy or salesy guy, but when I do offer my services or I do want to collaborate with someone, and obviously there's got to be some kind of, you know, I got to pay the mortgage somehow, right?
Sure.
But some of it is like me saying, like, yeah, we got to create something that we're
Hmm.
all proud of. And it is a legacy. Make no mistake, this song is going to be around longer, it's going to be around when you're not.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
going to be around forever.
Hmm.
But everything we do that put into this, or the money you give me for this, like we are like this is going to the greater good, and this is going
Hmm.
to last forever. So
Yeah, you're giving
uh,
it to the universe,
you are,
basically,
yeah.
right?
There's no doubt
Yeah.
about it. Like, yeah, when we're all dead and gone, um, you know, your EP is going to still be out
It
there,
will.
and
Sorry,
so,
world. I mean,
so
I think about that all the time, and I have even some songs on one of my solo records I put out last year that, talks about that. There's a song called "After I'm Dead," which is
yeah,
a song to my son saying like, basically,
mm,
whenever you want to hear my voice, you
yeah,
can,
you
and
can, yeah.
there's something really magical about that. Well, we've
Yeah.
been talking for a really long time. I told you an hour. We've gone past, but
That's fine. Yeah.
I do have one final question. You said you're not a salesy person, but
Okay.
I have to kind of put you on the spot.
Okay.
Um, this is a very cliche kind of thing, but this is kind of like an elevator pitch, right? So
Yeah.
if you're stuck in an elevator with Robbie, you start talking to a stranger
Yeah.
and they ask, what do you do?
Yeah.
Or, let's say you're stuck in the elevator with Dexter Holland from The Offspring,
Yeah.
or it could be Noodles,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know what their bass player's name because it's
I think
probably
it's
Peanut.
changed. Yeah.
Okay, it's not Peanut. That's the guy from 311.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Okay.
you've got limited amount of time to
Yeah.
say who you are, what you do, why people should know about you, why they should work with you before they go back to looking at their phone and ignoring you again.
Yes,
What
indeed.
is Robbie Miller's elevator pitch?
Oh boy. Okay. I think my elevator pitch is Robbie Miller. I'm a caring musician. I love consuming music and I love making music. And I'd love to work with you on a song. Or maybe somebody that you know. I'd love to work on one of their songs. But if we're going to work on it, it's going to be collaborative. And I come back to a line I've used already, but we're going to make something we're all proud of.
Mhm.
I don't want to put anything out that I'm not proud of either.
Yeah, right.
It's gonna we're in this together. So hopefully, that and that's it. Oh, gosh, I'm not too sure if I'd get the
Well,
gig, but that's my
I
thing of
think
like
you
is
would. I think
yeah.
you would because you started saying you're caring,
Mhm.
and I think that's a lost art, and when it becomes about a paycheck first and not about the art, maybe the art second, third, fourth, whatever, you can pick up on that pretty quickly from people, right? And I think what drew me to you immediately was like I knew that what it wasn't what it was about with
Mm,
you, and that's why I wanted to do this with you. It's because we're both trying to like still get our shit out there to anybody who's willing to listen,
yeah.
and we can help each other do that,
Yeah,
right? And
there's cross
that's what I'm
pollination.
really interested in doing,
Yeah.
and I think like it's more of like a for the universe type of thing, right? Where it's like I'm very self-aware. I don't think that like, you know, thousands of people are going to start DMing you after this episode goes live, but if one person does, it was
That
all worth it, right? You know what I mean? So
absolutely. Yeah.
so that's
And
that's kind of my
Ryan,
thought.
you've paid your dues, you've played a lot of music, you've recorded a lot of music. Um and you've met a lot of Robbie Millers along the way, and I really genuinely think that this is such a great idea for a podcast and as a dialogue, because it sounds to me like you're going to be reaching out to people that you've worked with and that you've created experiences
Or that
with,
I'm just fans of,
or that you're
honestly,
just fans of.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that you're going to be coming back to I think what has been the theme of this whole conversation, which is just like everything is intentional.
Hmm.
So I know I'm going to be listening to future episodes, because
Well,
if you've spoken to them, if you're speaking to these people, there's an intention and a reason behind it. And so
absolutely.
I need to have a listen to it myself. So
Well, thank you so
that's
much for being, the first guest on the You've
what a
Probably Never
pleasure.
Heard of Me podcast. I do, before we go, I want to give you the opportunity to just plug anything you're working on, tell people where they can find you, social links, website, whatever you think people need to know before we
Okay.
wrap up. This is your
Okay.
opportunity.
All right. Well, look, definitely Instagram seems to be where I hang out the most. So it's Robbie Miller without the vowels. Okay.
Okay.
ROBBY MLLR. You'll
Cool.
find me. Follow Ryan,
I'll
and then
I'll
follow
link
me,
it in the
and
show
then
notes.
I'll get up from there. And that seems to be the place YouTube can't afford to record. Um, if you are a musician or a songwriter or a band, even if you don't know, even if you're ready to get into the next stage yet, which might be mixing or produce or production help or anything like that, send me your song because I probably want to hear it. So even if you're like, hey, I got this song I'm working on, if you just want an opinion or some feedback, I'll do it. I don't care. There's no fee
Hell
involved
yeah.
for that.
I
Let's
love
let's
that.
just let's just like I want to hear it. So reach out
Yeah, man.
if you make songs, reach out, and I'd love to hear from anyone and everyone. And yeah, so man, thank you so much for having
Thank
me
you.
on it. Honestly,
Yeah,
it's been such a pleasure, and
likewise.
I'm really excited for the rest of your this little journey of
Cool,
building a
man.
cool
Well, I
scene.
appreciate it. I very much appreciate it. Thank you so much for being on the show. Go check out Robby Miller at all the places that he just listed. I'll put it in the show notes for the post. I'll link all the things so you can get easy access to it. Robby Miller, producer, mixer, engineer, mastering engineer, musician, folk,
Folk young
diddly
prodigy.
picker, offspring fan. He's a multi-talented guy, and definitely
Oh,
give him a shout if you need help making your music sound uh, totally kick ass. So thanks again,
thanks,
Robby.
man.
Have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon, man. All right.
Speak to you soon.
Thanks.